So I see so many videos on YouTube that are just these like perfect sewing spaces that feel like either they're cleaning up their space every 5 minutes or maybe spending more time organizing and less time actually making. So I just kind of wanted to counterbalance that for anybody who, feels like their sewing space is a little chaotic. That's okay. We can be a little chaotic and still be highly functional. So today I want to give you a tour of a very small corner of my workspace that is now highly functional. It's all a process. There's other spaces that have work that needs to be done. And I also want to share some of my favorite tiny tools that I use on like an hourly basis to save time and show how they actually live and function in my space in a way that's really supportive of my practice. So this isn't about buying fancy gadgets or buying anything really. This is about how minor details will make your process much easier, especially when you only have small pockets of time to work within. If you have kids or a full-time job or any of those, this time is so precious. So sometimes it's like 20 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, and I don't want to spend that time hunting for tools or fighting my materials. And so then we're going to wrap this video up with a little tour of this sewing corner so you can see the recent makeover that I got, and also what's still a work in progress in this ever-evolving space of making. First off, if you don't know me, hi. I'm Christy Johnson, artist, author, and teacher. I teach embroidery and clothing making and textile arts for the imperfect human, for the visionary who wants to transform their dreams into textural designs on fabric without feeling like every skill needs to be perfected to do so. So let's jump in. First, I want to share with you my favorite tools and how I've arranged them to be easily accessible from my sewing table. This isn't like an affiliate thing. I'm not getting paid by any of these companies. This is actually, I'm just sharing what actually works for me. Maybe if I was one of those like type A perfectionist organized studio people, I would have actually gotten affiliate links for these. But I hate Amazon. Anyways, let's jump in. So tool number one, my irons. So side note, I am like 8 months pregnant, so that's just going to be in the picture with us. So first up, this is my ironing station. It is just a piece of wood with a wool felt on top of it, and I actually have two different kinds of irons. The first is a precision iron. It has a very pointed tip. These are not on. And this is incredible for pressing seams open flat, especially in tight areas or working with patchwork or short seam allowances. But I also use it for erasing lines with my heat erasable pens. So I use heat erasable pens a lot in my embroidery, and this acts like a tiny heat pen. So I can erase the finest lines without affecting the lines surrounding it. So it's like this tiny little heat eraser. I've had this one for years. I don't love the shape of it. It's a little awkward. And the little stand that came with it disappeared a long time ago. So I usually just like hang it from something and hope no one touches it. Fingers crossed. Or just try and make sure this part is not touching anything, because this part is very hot. The second mini iron I have is newer, and I love it because it fits in a very small space. So my ironing board is very small, and I'm just able to quickly like flatten a corner or tame a wrinkle without pulling out a big iron. I can also grab it really easily, and it's just nice to have something small. I love my big iron. Don't get me wrong. It's kind of vintage, kind of heavy, kind of clunky, but these small ones, they're lightweight. They are able to live out in the open a little bit better. And they make pressing take just a few extra seconds instead of feeling like a whole event where I have to pull out this big iron. They're also easier to use when you're sitting down. A big iron, you kind of want to stand up and get that like leverage. These ones, you don't need to stand up to use them. You can just kind of doo-doo. So next up, while we're over here at the ironing board, is my bias tape makers. So I have a little spot for them right here. I used to think these tools were kind of ridiculous. I thought, it's just folding fabric. I can do it myself. And then I bought a 5-pack of these. They are wildly helpful. So they fold the two outer edges evenly. So you insert your fabric into here, pull it out of here, and iron it as you're pulling it out. And it makes your bias tapes consistent and clean. So I use bias tapes a lot for clothing, for interior necklines, for seam finishing, and I also use it for applique. So store-bought bias tape usually has 3 folds. Which means if you want a 3-fold version, you just have to fold it in half and press it again. Sounds more complicated than it is. It's actually very easy. What surprised me about these though is how versatile they are. So having multiple sizes means I can almost use them as like drawing tools. So when I'm doing applique, I can use bias tape to create curved lines and shapes and stripes and things. It's almost like sketching with fabric. You can't like really curve it, but they give a nice soft curve. And having them in different sizes has actually caused me to be more creative with this technique. So it's brought more exploration into my process and sort of started to open up more new ideas. So I think they've genuinely improved my sewing. Bias on my neckline looks better, and it saves me from a lot of frustration when I'm finishing edges. This internal bias binding technique is one of the many techniques that I teach in my Softwork Intuitive Garment Design course. So if you're interested in learning more about how to make clothing design easier and make sewing much simpler, be sure to check out that course. Okay, next up, let's move over to my little homemade sewing caddy. So this is where my sewing machine lives. We'll look at that a little bit later, but right now I want to take a look at this little homemade caddy. This can be anything. This doesn't need to be like some homemade thing. But here I have my mini scissors. I always make sure there's a pair of scissors in here. We have a heat erasable pen. We've got a seam ripper. We have pins. We have a pocket for clips, loops that I've yet to use for anything, and my glue stick. I know, weird. But washable glue sticks are incredibly useful. So I use them when pins aren't necessarily appropriate. So if you've got like a slippery fabric or awkward layers, or if I'm testing applique placement. And the glue stick is especially helpful when you're still deciding where something goes. This is this tiny glue stick. So like sequins or small fabric shapes or any layered elements. The glue lets you practice placing elements quickly, so you spend less time in that like deliberation zone, in that wishy-washy zone of like, but will it work? Is it going to fit there? And you can just see immediately and step back. I love this tiny glue pen version. You don't need a glue pen version. A regular glue stick will work fine, but the precision is really great for small hems and edges. So for example, when I'm doing a very narrow hem, let's say like an 1/8 of an inch hem or like a 1/4 of an inch hem, I will glue down that initial fold and then fold it again to hide that raw edge and then stitch it down. So this behaves much better than trying to press and pin something that small. Most fabrics respond extremely well to this. There's a few slippery fabrics that don't love glue, but honestly, I don't love those fabrics. So whatever. So lastly are my binder clips. They're not sewing tools technically, and this is like not revolutionary by any means, but I use them constantly. They do make these like plastic sewing clips, but I just prefer binder clips. They're cheaper. They come in multiple sizes. You can find them at the office supply store, and they're metal. Plastic breaks, metal rarely breaks, and they're also biodegradable, and I always tend to go with the biodegradable option. I use them anywhere that pins don't work, so like bulky seams or thick layers. Even when I'm making like my little cosmic charms, because there can be a lot of embroidery going on in those areas, and when you pin it, it tends to really like ripple the fabric. By having binder clips around the edge to hold the seams together, it lays much more flat. So I've started kind of using those way more frequently in my sewing work. And then if I have a lot of bulk, so for example, when I was making these small needle books for the pocket altar kits that I made for the holidays, the binder clips were essential for holding those stacked seams together without getting the distortion that I would have gotten if I had pinned through. So they're one of those tools that end up being more useful than the thing that they're specifically designed for. I also love using them when I'm designing little zines. So to make my zines, I usually print out the pages at like half size. And I use the binder clips to keep them together for doing like a real life run through and editing through them at half size and kind of getting the idea of them, instead of trying to staple through like 80 layers of paper. So now I want to show you how these tools actually function in my space. So this is my sewing corner. It's small, but everything I need is within reach. So over here, I have my tiny ironing board right next to my machine, so I can access that really easily. My bias tape makers hang on the wall within reach of the iron. There's my little sewing caddy. My machine lives on a table that was actually made for an old Singer sewing machine. I love that Singer machine, but it doesn't have a zigzag, so I can't use it all the time. But I love the vintage table it came in. I found that at a garage sale. All of my bobbins and needles are back behind my sewing machine. Not my favorite spot for them, but there they are. And now that I'm recording this, I feel like I should also make a tool caddy for my bobbins and my needles. But anyways, my threads. So all my threads live up on here, which this used to be a dishwasher rack. When we moved into this house, which was built in the 60s, it still had the same chocolate brown appliances that the original owners had bought. And while the fridge and the stove worked for a shockingly long amount of time, the dishwasher was donezo. But this robin's egg blue drawer just felt like I wanted to repurpose it into something and had so much character. So I made it into this thread storage unit. I usually buy serger thread for sewing thread. That way I don't run out nearly as fast, and I'm like an hour from the nearest craft store. And these long spokes of the dishwasher are perfect for these, and sometimes I just stack them on top like that. Then for my tiny thread spools, I just have one of these little classic thread holder things. Probably got it at Joann's, RIP. And then we have a jewelry box that my uncle made. Really beautiful, made from black walnut that he has on his land in Oregon. Love that. Haven't figured out what to store in it yet. And then we have these drawers down here. We have just whatever in them: pen, stamp, lace, yarn. Found these on the side of the road about a half a mile away. The neighbor came out and helped me load them in my car and let me know that they're from a veterinarian's office. Love hearing the original story of my secondhand furniture. And then over here, more books, my knitting needle caddy, my crochet hooks, my embroidery floss, a ton of beads, random other threads and things in these acrylic drawers, easy to grab. Everything is visible, everything is accessible. And recently I got this giant dresser secondhand because that's how I do everything. It's perfect for the things that don't need to be visible but do need to be accessible. So we've got a bunch of yarns here, mostly cottons. We've got a bunch of solid fabrics, a few prints, a bunch of example textiles that I use for teaching or for reference, my half-finished work. I'm hoping to get inspired to get finished by seeing how they look in that drawer. So you can see this isn't about some perfect organization system or having all the latest bins from the Container Store. That will not solve your problem. I am absolutely not an organization expert. I run out of space. I put things in the basement. I shove them underneath cabinets. That's how things go around here. But I do a lot of work in my studio. And over time, you start to learn what a studio needs to function. So what needs to be easy to access, what needs to be nearby, and what starts to slow you down when it's missing. And a lot of what works for organizing for me is using what I already have, but just arranging it in a smarter way. Buying things secondhand is definitely a key element, and just playing around and seeing what works, just like the creative process itself. So this is really about noticing what supports your process. And when it comes to moving around our own creative spaces, what we're going for, more than aesthetics, more than perfect organization, is ease. Because ease leads to enjoyment, and enjoyment leads to consistency. And consistency, not just pretty arrangements that look good on camera, but consistency, as in consistently returning to the work, is what actually makes the work happen. That's the only way it's going to get done, especially when time is limited. So these are some of my favorite tools. This is how I like to use them in my studio. This is my new favorite spot in my studio. And I'm not sharing these tools because they're revolutionary or flashy or sexy, or because I get a 10% off sale if you click my link below. Again, that would have been a really smart thing to do. But instead, I'm sharing these tools and this setup because it's what makes my process more enjoyable, even just a little bit every single day. So I'd love to know if you thought any of this was helpful for you, or if any of this gave you ideas for how to better use your own space. And if you have any recommendations, please drop them in the comments. Tell me your favorite tools, your favorite way of organizing. I'd love to learn more from you as well. Maybe I'll even make another video like this if I get enough helpful recommendations. Thanks so much. Feel free to share this with a crafty friend who might need a little help, or a crafty friend that could help us all. That would also be great. I'd love that too. All right, see you later. Head to mixedcolor.net for more. Oh, and I think this is the point where I'm supposed to ask you to like and subscribe, I guess.